Hi friends, my name is Maruti and I'm the co-founder of Cracku. In this video, we'll be looking at the video solutions for CAT 2022 Verbal Slot-1. If you have not attempted these questions, I would recommend you to go to the Cracku previous papers page. You can find the link if you just search for Cracku CAT previous papers and download a PDF of the examination of that particular slot and try to answer the questions on your own. Once you answer the questions, if you want to look at the video solutions, then you can come back and check this video. In fact, when you download the PDF from our site, at the end of every question, there is a button where you click on it, you will be redirected to the video solution. That is, you will be automatically redirected to this page. So you should definitely check that also out. Anyway, this is a very useful video and it will help students who are preparing for CAT. Cracku offers a lot of material completely for free. For example, we offer the complete revision of CAT syllabus for Quant, LRDI and Verbal. All of them are available on YouTube. You should definitely check it out. Those videos are very useful and they help a beginner understand the entire syllabus very thoroughly. In addition to that, we are also offering 3 free mocks. All of them are in the latest pattern of CAT. You should definitely check them out. They even have video solutions and they are taken by thousands of students. So if you want to start your CAT preparation, one of the first things that you should do is take a free CAT mock. In addition to that, like I mentioned earlier, we also have all the CAT previous papers with video solutions completely available for free in a PDF format. You should just Google search Cracku CAT previous papers. You'll go to the site and you can download all the PDF papers and you should try to attempt them on your own. If you like this video, please do subscribe to our channel and please click on the bell icon. In addition to that, if you are having any doubt with respect to any of these questions, please comment below the video. We'll look at every comment and we'll try to respond to it to the best of our ability.
Hello and welcome to another video by Cracku. A passage has been given below. Let us read it carefully and answer the questions that follow. Stoicism was founded in 300 BC by the Greek philosopher Zeno and survived into the Roman era until about 300 AD. According to the Stoics, emotions consist of 2 movements. The first movement is the immediate feeling and other reactions, example physiological response, that occur when a stimulus or event occurs. For instance, consider what could have happened if an army general accused Marcus Aurelius of treason in front of other officers. The first movement for Marcus may have been internal surprise and anger in response to this insult, accompanied perhaps by some involuntary physiological and expressive responses, such as face flushing and a movement of the eyebrows. The second movement is what one does next about the emotion. Second movement behaviors occur after thinking are under one's control. Examples of second movements for Marcus might have included a plot to seek revenge, actions signifying deference and appeasement, or perhaps proceeding as he would have proceeded whether or not this event occurred, continuing to lead the Romans in a way that Marcus Aurelius believed best benefited them. In the Stoic view, choosing a reasoned, unemotional response as the second movement is the only appropriate response. So in this first paragraph, the author discusses the idea of emotion as viewed from the lens of Stoicism. The author emphasizes that for Stoics, there are 2 aspects to an emotion. So the first movement and the second movement that the author describes here, these are both attached to emotions. So the first movement, according to them, is the immediate response that we showcase. And this could be perhaps some kind of physiological response. So for example, the author gives the instance of Marcus Aurelius. He says that let's assume this hypothetical situation wherein Marcus Aurelius, who is an important figure perhaps for the Romans, this particular figure was insulted by a general. A general accused him of treason. So the first response for Marcus would definitely be surprise as well as anger. So this is the first movement or the first response to the stimulus according to the author, and this is categorized as the first movement, which is part of an emotion. The author says, or he continues, that the second movement for Marcus would be the way in which he chooses to react to this particular emotion that he felt. So he definitely felt surprise and anger. What could be the follow-up? The author emphasizes that there are many avenues that presents itself to Marcus. So perhaps he could plot to seek revenge against this particular general who accused him of treason. Second, he could perhaps, let's say, deny any allegations and he could try to appease or appeal to the rationale of other members who are present in that particular discussion. Or perhaps he could not choose not to react at all. Perhaps he could just continue forward with what he was already planning. And according to the author, he was a leader of some form. He was the leader of the Roman army here. And the author is trying to say that this is the third avenue that presents itself to Marcus. Perhaps he could choose not to react and simply continue with what he had already planned. So these are the different options that Marcus has. And the author says that for Stoics specifically, what they would prefer in such a situation when it comes to the second movement is to be reasoned and unemotional. So this is what they expect from a Stoic. And the author here in this regard is trying to talk about the entire element or the entire set of principles perhaps that create an emotion, at least when viewed from the perspective of Stoics. So for them, there are two components to emotion, the first movement and the second movement. And more specifically, what they are perhaps focusing on is the second movement here. There is a peculiar way in which Stoics are expected to react, especially in terms of second movement. So whether or not, regardless of how they feel, they have to perhaps, or they are expected to react in a reasoned, rational, unemotional way. So this is what the author is trying to highlight here. And in this regard, the first paragraph is trying to talk about emotion in terms of first movement and second movement. So I hope this distinction is clear. First movement is the immediate response to any kind of stimulus or event that you feel, the kind of physiological feeling that you have. For example, you feel anger, you might feel surprised, you might feel happy at a particular news. All of these are internal perhaps to some extent, but nevertheless the author is simply trying to say that these are emotions that you feel immediately following a particular stimulus, but the reaction to that stimulus is what is categorized as the second movement. And this is an idea that takes prominence or is quite significant for the Stoics. This is the point being made here in the first paragraph. Let us move on to the next one. The Stoics believe that to live a good life and be a good person, we need to free ourselves of nearly all desires, such as too much desire for money, power, or sexual gratification. Prior to second movements, we can consider what is important in life. Money, power, and excessive sexual gratification are not important. Character, rationality, and kindness are important. The Epicureans, first associated with the Greek philosopher Epicurus, had a similar view, believing that people should enjoy simple pleasures such as good conversation, friendship, food, and wine, but not be indulgent in these pursuits and not follow passion for these things that hold no value, like power and money. As Oatley 2004 states, the Epicureans articulated a view, enjoyment of relationship with friends, of things that are real rather than illusory, simple rather than artificially inflated, possible rather than vanishingly unlikely. That is certainly relevant today. In sum, these ancient Greek and Roman philosophers saw emotions, especially strong ones, as potentially dangerous. They viewed emotions as experiences that needed to be reined in and controlled. So here we gain some more clarity into the context. The author had already talked about the Stoic idea of emotions comprising of first movement and second movement. Here he's continuing on that line. He's extending on that line by giving us more insights, by telling us that these are aspects that the Stoics emphasized, and there is a similarity with this particular belief if you look at it from the Greek perspective as well. So he gives the example of Epicureans, a particular class of people who perhaps subscribe to the idea or philosophy of Epicurus. He also had a similar note wherein they were against strong emotions. And this appears to be the center point of the discussion. The author highlights that if you look at it, there is a commonality between these two ideas, or from these two different spaces, from the Greeks and the Romans. They held a sort of hostility or antagonism towards strong emotions. So they were against it. They wanted us to be in control of our emotions. This is what they both suggested, according to the author. So in the second paragraph, the author begins by telling us that the Stoic way of life is something that believed in not indulging too much in elements such as power, money, or sexual gratification. So they said that perhaps only in moderation and not excessive indulgence. This is what they believed in. The author says that for them, this was not important at all, money, power, and excessive sexual gratification. Instead, what was significant, or what held significance, was character, rationality, and kindness. These were values or virtues that they wanted to instill in themselves. So this is the Stoic perspective. The author then transitions into a discussion on the Epicureans, saying that they also had a similar view. What they focused on was enjoying simple pleasures such as conversations with people, the relationships that you have, friendships, food, wine, all of these. It's good for you to enjoy them, but not to indulge in them. This is what the Epicureans believed in. And again, for them, elements such as power and money, these were not very important. So the author is simply trying to show that the Epicureans shared a similar kind of perspective to that of the Stoics. The author then talks about Oatley. So this might be a particular author, we do not know for sure, but again the author is trying to talk about Oatley's perspective or take on again Epicureans, that for them they had certain priorities, they had certain order in which they considered things. This order is presented here, that they uh, uh, focused or emphasized relationship with friends. They believed in what was real than illusory. They believed in things that were simple than artificially inflated. They believed in things that were actually possible rather than, let's say, daydreaming. So these were the values or ethos that actually drove or that the Epicureans strived for, and the author is simply trying to present them here. Altogether, we come across this common point between these two factions, Epicureans and Stoics. The author is simply trying to say that both of them, if you look at it, they were against strong emotions. They wanted us as individuals, as humans, to be in control of our emotions. So this again ties to the Stoic idea of first movement and second movement, wherein the author says that the first movement is something perhaps beyond your control. It is something that you might not be able to control aptly. But the second, the way in which you are responding to that particular emotion, the second movement, that is something that might be in control. So this might be tying into this idea of first movement and second movement that the author discussed in the first paragraph. Let us continue further. As Oatley points out, the Stoic idea bears some similarity to Buddhism. Buddha lived in India in the 6th century BC, argued for cultivating a certain attitude that decreases the probability of, in Stoic terms, destructive second movements. Through meditation and the right attitude, one allows emotions to happen to oneself. It is impossible to prevent this, but one is advised to observe the emotions without necessarily acting on them. One achieves some distance and decides what has value and what does not have value. Additionally, the Stoic idea of developing virtue in oneself, of becoming a good person, which the Stoics believed we could do because we have a touch of the divine, laid the foundation for the three monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. As with Stoicism, tenets of these religions include controlling our emotions lest we engage in sinful behavior. So here there are certain elements that the author is trying to discuss. He's putting forward certain ideas which is central to the discussion that happened earlier on. So for one, the author emphasizes that there are not only similarity between, let's say, Stoicism and Epicureans, but also the Stoic idea of emotions with that of the elements or the principles preached in Buddhism as well. So that's one point the author emphasizes. And he says that even this was also the sort of foundation or substrate that we can attach to other set of monotheistic religions such as Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So if you look at it, there are similarities across the panel here. The author is trying to say that the Stoic idea of controlling emotions, of moderating and regulating emotions, is something that is not unique to the Stoics. It is something that we observe in Epicureans. It is something that we observe in Buddhists. Let's say people who follow Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. All of these people, if you look at it, they have been taught this idea of reining in emotions, of controlling emotions properly. And this is the idea the author also clarifies here in the first part of the final paragraph. He says that if you look at it, the Buddhists, they have been taught to reduce the probability of destructive second movements. So by destructive second movements, something is highlighted here. Perhaps it is the kind of negative response that we showcase when it comes to a particular emotion. So the author might be trying to imply or hint here that when we feel a specific emotion, we immediately react to it. We let it sort of devour ourselves, and this is something that might not agree with Stoics or Buddhists. So this is the point being made here. The author says that the Buddhists are told that you are supposed to distance yourself from the emotion that you feel. It's okay for you to feel a particular emotion, but you need to distance yourself from it. And by distancing, the author here says that the Buddhists, they convey that you have to detach yourself from that emotion temporarily. You have to view that emotion, you have to assess it, you have to decide what is valuable for you, and then you have to react accordingly. So this is what the Buddhists are taught. And in this regard, this is something that is being preached in this particular part of the discussion, wherein we are told that it's best for us to observe the emotions without actually acting on them. And this is perhaps what it means to decrease the probability of destructive second movements. So this is the point being highlighted here in the first half of the final paragraph. And then the author is simply telling us that, okay, this is a belief that is not unique to, let's say, just Stoics or Buddhists. You will come across this kind of viewpoints across other religions, other monotheistic religions, such as Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The author says that if you look at it, they are also taught to control their emotions, in order to not engage in any kind of sinful behavior. But again, now this is tied to the idea of morality, which is a totally different topic. But altogether, the author's primary intention here in the last part of the discussion is to showcase the common points, to showcase how the idea that the Stoics put forward is something that we'll come across different religions as well. I hope the discussion is clear. Now that we have understood what this passage is about, let us move on to the questions and try answering them. Question number 1. Through meditation and the right attitude, one allows emotions to happen to oneself. It is impossible to prevent this, but one is advised to observe the emotions without necessarily acting on them. One achieves some distance and decides what has value and what does not have value. In the context of the passage, which one of the following is not a possible implication of the quoted statement? So basically, the question requires us to find a choice that does not align or that is not consistent with what is being discussed here. So for this particular excerpt, it is quite understood, or it's quite obvious that what the author is trying to tell here is that we have to learn to distance ourselves from the emotion that we feel immediately, and instead of reacting to it, we need to observe it carefully. And the reason behind observing it is also specified, that we have to identify what holds value for us and what does not hold value for us. So in the case of Stoics or the Epicureans, we are told that certain things are not significant for them. For the Stoics, for example, they are more focused on character, rationality, and kindness rather than, let's say, money, power, or sexual gratification. So in a way, this particular point is just trying to tell us that what we need to do is to hold back, to not immediately react to the first movement or the emotion that we feel immediately, and instead to observe this particular emotion and identify what's valuable to us and what's not valuable to us, and then come up with a specific response. This is the prescription here in this particular passage. Let us check which of the options would be consistent with this particular idea that is being highlighted here in this excerpt. A. Meditation and the right attitude in this instance implies an initially passive reception of all experiences. That's true. When the author is asking us to distance ourselves from the emotion, he's not asking us to run away. He's just telling us that first, don't react immediately to that particular emotion. Hold back, stay still, first observe it, and then react. That's the suggestion he's making. So in a way, he is asking us for a passive reception. And option A is valid in this regard. So it's a possible implication of what the author is trying to convey here via the excerpt. B. Meditation allows certain out-of-body experiences that permit us to gain the distance necessary to control our emotions. Now, this entire idea of out-of-body experience is not within the scope of the discussion, so we cannot comment whether B is valid here or not. For one, we know for sure that this is not what the author is trying to imply here. He's trying to tell us about a different way. By detaching ourselves from that emotion, he's not telling us to, let go of that emotion, or he's not talking about out of body experiences. He's simply telling us to hold still, to observe that emotion and then react. So it's not as if he's talking about out of the body experiences. So option B is totally off topic, which is why it's not a possible implication according to me. It's likely to be the correct choice here. C. The observation of emotions in a distant manner corresponds to the second movement referred to earlier in the passage. That's right, because the author is trying to tell us that what we need to do is to observe this emotion rather than to immediately react to it. So this Buddhist idea is quite similar to that of Stoics. So option C is also a valid implication. The author is basically telling us that the first moment, the way in which we feel emotions, is fine. But the second movement, the way in which we react to that emotion, is something that we need to reconsider. So option C is valid. D. emotional responses can make it difficult to distinguish valuable experiences from valueless experiences. That's true. The author says that if we are not responding in perhaps, let's say, a rational, unemotional way, then perhaps we might not be able to distinguish between things that are valuable from the things that are not valuable to us. So if you notice here, what the author is trying to tell us is that the primary reason why we should observe that particular emotion and then react is to distinguish between things that hold value for us from things that don't hold value for us. So if we are reacting emotionally, if we are reacting promptly to that particular emotion that we feel, then it might make it difficult for us to distinguish from valuable things from things that are not valuable, so valueless things. So option D is also true based on this particular excerpt. It fits with what has been discussed in the passage. So we notice that only option B is something that goes off on a tangent. It's totally off topic, which is why option B is the correct answer here. Question number 2. Which one of the following statements would be an accurate inference from the example of Marcus Aurelius? Let us examine the choices. A. Marcus Aurelius was humiliated by the accusation of treason in front of other officers. This is a possibility that the author hints at. He's trying to tell us about this hypothetical situation. So the entire purpose of that exercise is to tell us about first movement and second movement. It's not necessarily something that actually took place. So the author is just taking the example of Marcus Aurelius to sort of illustrate this idea of first movement and the idea of second movement. So we cannot definitively say that A is true, which is why we can reject it. B. Marcus Aurelius was a Stoic whose philosophy survived into the Roman era. Again, we have whatsoever no information to back up this claim, which is why we can reject it. C. Marcus Aurelius plotted revenge in his quest for justice. Again, similar to A, we can reject it because the author is simply presenting a hypothetical situation. He has not stated that this is true instance. So option C can be rejected. D. Marcus Aurelius was one of the leaders of the Roman army. This is primarily true because the author hints at this idea. He says that Marcus could just go forward and do what he was supposed to do, which is to lead the Roman army. So from this particular point that the author states in the first paragraph, we can infer that Marcus Aurelius was in fact a leader, important or prominent person who was perhaps, let's say, leading the Roman army. So option D is the only statement that might be somewhat true based on the information provided to us. The rest can be rejected. So option D is the correct answer. Question 3. Which of the following statements, if false, could be seen as contradicting the facts / arguments in the passage? So the statements that are given to us are true in the current form. We have to make them false and then check if it's contradicting what is being discussed in the passage. So let us examine the choices individually. A. Despite practicing meditation and cultivating the right attitude, emotions cannot ever be controlled. So if this is false, what will be the statement be? It will be that despite practicing meditation and cultivating the right attitude, emotions can be controlled. So if it's true, then it's basically just implying that through meditation and cultivation of the right attitude, you are able to control your emotions. Now, this is quite consistent with what the author has discussed in the passage. This is what the Buddhists had suggested or advised. So option A, if false, would actually support the discussion in the passage, which is why we can reject option A. B. The Greek philosopher Zeno survived into the Roman era until about 300 AD. Now, I'm not sure how this is relevant to any of the arguments that is highlighted. Facts, perhaps, yes. So we are told here that the Greek philosopher, that Stoicism was found by Greek philosopher Zeno in 300 BC and survived into the Roman era until about 300 AD. But again, this fact is not attached, or this entire idea of surviving into Roman era is perhaps not attached to Zeno, so I'm not sure how B is relevant to the discussion. Nevertheless, even if it's false, again, it might be consistent with what is being highlighted here in this first part of the discussion. So we can reject option B as well. C. In the Epicurean view, indulging in simple pleasures is not desirable. So if this is false, the statement becomes, in the Epicurean view, indulging in simple pleasures is desirable. Now, if that's true, that is definitely contradicting what has been stated in the passage, because we are told that Epicureans believe in not indulging excessively. So option C, if false, will actually contradict the facts or arguments in the passage. So it's likely to be the correct choice. D. In the Stoic view, choosing a reasoned, unemotional response as the first movement is an appropriate response to an emotional situation. So, if false, it would state that choosing a reasoned, unemotional response as the first movement. Okay, again, it's with regard to first movement. So, I'm not sure how this is again relevant to the discussion whatsoever, because this entire idea of choosing a reasoned, unemotional response is with regard to the second movement. So, option D is something again tangential to the discussion, akin to option B. We can reject it. We notice that only option C is something that, if false, would definitely contradict the argument made in the passage, which is why option C is the correct choice. Let us move on to the next question. Question number 4. On the basis of the passage, which one of the following statements can be regarded as true? So it has to be consistent with the discussion. A. The Stoics valorized the pursuit of money, power, and sexual gratification. We know this is false, primarily because the author says that they did not glorify this. They were against this set of the set of values. The author says that instead what they focused was on character, kindness, and rationality. So option A is untrue. B. The Stoic influences can be seen in multiple religions. Again, a valid claim, because towards the end of the discussion, the author says that if you look at it, you will find traces of this Stoic idea of first movement and second movement in Buddhism. You will find it in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So option B is valid. C. The Epicureans believed in controlling all emotions. Now, this is an excessive claim here. All emotions, we are not very sure. They said that we need to enjoy all things in moderation, but again, here it's exaggerating what is being presented in the passage, so we can reject option C. We notice that A and C are definitely not true, while option B is true. The author is telling us that we can find influences of Stoic in multiple religions, so B is likely to be the correct choice. D. There were no Stoics in India at the time of Roman civilization. Again, a claim that we cannot substantiate from the information available to us. So we can reject option D. We notice that B is the only statement that can be regarded as true based on the discussion that we have observed so far. So option B here is the correct answer. Thank you. Hello and welcome to another video by Cracku. A passage has been given below. Let us read it carefully and answer the questions that follow. The Chinese have two different concepts of a copy. Fangjipin are imitations where the difference from the original is obvious. These are small models or copies that can be purchased in a museum shop. For example, the second concept for a copy is Fujipin. They are exact reproductions of the original, which for the Chinese are of equal value to the original. It has absolutely no negative connotations. The discrepancy with regard to the understanding of what a copy is has often led to misunderstandings and arguments between China and Western museums. The Chinese often send copies abroad instead of originals, in the firm belief that they are not essentially different from the originals. The rejection that then comes from the Western museums is perceived by the Chinese as an insult. So, in this first paragraph, the author talks about the Chinese understanding of creating imitations or reproductions. The author talks about two concepts that the Chinese believe in. One is Fangjipin and another is Fujipin. So, both of these have their own significance in the discussion. The author especially highlights how there is a difference in the interpretation or understanding of creating these imitations in China versus the Western world. So the author says that Western world perhaps is a bit more stricter in terms of creating imitations or evaluating imitations as compared to China. So for the Chinese, there are these two concepts. By Fangjipin, what they mean are imitations that are pretty much obvious. These are things that you might find in a souvenir shop, for example. So smaller in size or a replica of the models that are original. Compared to this, there is the concept of Fujipin, which is an exact reproduction of the original. So in any kind of artwork, which is, let's say, reproduced in the exact same manner as the original, is considered as Fujipin. So for the Chinese, this holds an equal value to them. And as a consequence, the author says that this kind of understanding has led to a lot of skirmish between Chinese museums and the Western museums. So whenever, let's say, they want to send a particular artwork, what the Chinese do is they send an exact replica or a sort of a Fujipin copy of this particular artwork to the foreign museums, and the Western museums, they do not take this or consider this in good light. So they definitely send back these reproductions or imitations. And as a consequence, the Chinese perceive this as an insult to their work. So in a way, the author is basically trying to highlight this difference in perspective or difference in opinion between the Chinese understanding of imitations compared to the Western world. So here the author is trying to delineate two different concepts, the concept of Fangxipin and the concept of Fujipin that the Chinese believe in. So I hope this segment is understood. Let us move on to the next part of the discussion. The Far Eastern notion of identity is also very confusing to the Western observer. The Ise Grand Shrine in Japan is 1,300 years old for the millions of Japanese people who go there on pilgrimage every year. But in reality, this temple complex is completely rebuilt from scratch every 20 years. So the author is trying to give us another example here. The example is that of Ise Grand Shrine. There might be some kind of significance as to why he is discussing this. Perhaps in the next segment, we might get more clarity. But altogether, the author is simply trying to highlight how the Western world often has a lot of trouble reconciling with the Eastern concepts or Eastern notions of imitations or reproductions. So in this concept, he's trying to extend on this idea by giving us the example of Ise Grand Shrine, wherein he's trying to say that this is a shrine that is considered to be 1,300 years old by the Japanese people, but in fact it's built from scratch every 20 years. So it's basically new if you look at it from the Western perspective or Western lens. So the author is basically simply trying to showcase this difference in perspective that exists here, and more specifically he wants to emphasize how Westerners have trouble reconciling with Eastern notions. This is the point he's trying to convey here. Let us move forward to the next part. The Cathedral of Freiburg Minster in southwest Germany is covered in scaffolding almost all year round. The sandstone from which it is built is a very soft porous material that does not withstand natural erosion by rain and wind. After a while, it crumbles. As a result, the cathedral is continually being examined for damage and eroded stones are replaced. And in the cathedral's dedicated workshop, copies of the damaged sandstone figures are constantly being produced. Of course, attempts are made to preserve the stones from the Middle Ages for as long as possible. But at some point too, they too are removed and replaced with new stones. So the author is giving another example, which is of the Cathedral of Freiburg Minster in southwest Germany. The author is trying to highlight how this particular monument is undergoing continuous restoration of some form. The author says that it's made of this porous soft material and of sandstone specifically, and it needs to be replaced continually because it gets eroded very easily due to rain and wind. And the author highlights that at some point in time, perhaps all elements of this monument or this structure might also be replaced. So it might be quite similar to what we looked here in terms of Ise Grand Shrine, only that the time scale is a bit more extended in this particular instance. Let us read further as to understand why the author is giving us these set of examples. There has to be a particular intention here. Fundamentally, this is the same operation as with the Japanese shrine, except in this case, the production of a replica takes place very slowly and over long periods of time. In the field of art as well, the idea of an unassailable original developed historically in the Western world. Back in the 17th century in the West, excavated artworks from antiquity were treated quite differently from today. They were not restored in a way that was faithful to the original. Instead, there was massive intervention in these works, changing their appearance. So two elements are discussed. One, the author is trying to summarize why he gave the example of the Ise Grand Shrine and the Freiburg Minster Cathedral. The author highlights that if you look at it, both the operations that is taking place here is quite similar, only that the time scale is a bit varied. So in the case of the Japanese shrine, it is being rebuilt every 20 years. This might not be the case with the cathedral, but the author is basically trying to highlight the similarity between these two operations, or the operation of rebuilding or restoring these structures. And in a way, the author is again highlighting how the notions quite differ in terms of looking at this particular operation of restoring these structures. So for the Westerners, perhaps this process of rebuilding the shrine might not bode well with them. So they might not be able to understand what's happening here and why it is being labeled as, let's say, 1,300 years old. And In the case of Freiburg Minster, the process is much more gradual, it's much more slower, which is why they might continue to perceive it as an old monument. So the author is altogether just trying to highlight how Westerners might have difficulty in reconciling with Eastern notions. This is again in regard to what the author has discussed earlier on with regard to the conflict that exists between, let's say, Chinese museums and Western museums with regard to creating imitations. So again, a difference or a sort of conflict that originates in terms of different interpretations. Let us read further. The author also talks about one specific idea here in the second part of this paragraph that we just read. The author says that this idea of unassailable original might be perhaps new because up until 17th century, the way in which Westerners treated artworks was quite different. So in a way, the author says that they were seldom true to the original. So in a way, the author is just trying to highlight that people during this particular period, the Western world, let's say during the 17th century, it had a different perspective of what would qualify, let's say, as an original or an imitation. So rather than imitation, what the author is trying to highlight is that the way in which people worked on original artworks or on original works in general was quite different. So there was a lot of intervention, and by intervention it could be perhaps any kind of intervention, we cannot say for sure. But what the author is trying to highlight is that there was a lot of extra effort that was put into, let's say, building or rebuilding that particular artwork. And in this regard, the author is trying to say that this is a bit different from our current or the Western world's current notion of what would qualify as original or an imitation. So in a way, the author is just trying to say, or he might be trying to hint at this possibility that this idea of an unassailable original, so something that has to be true, is quite new as an idea here in the West. This is what he's trying to perhaps convey here. It is probably this intellectual position that explains why Asians have far fewer scruples about cloning than Europeans. The South Korean cloning researcher Hwang Won-suk, who attracted worldwide attention with his cloning experiments in 2004, is a Buddhist. He found a great deal of support and followers among Buddhists, while Christians called for a ban on human cloning. Hwang legitimized his cloning experiments with his religious affiliation. I am a Buddhist and I have no philosophical problem with cloning. As you know, the basis of Buddhism is that life can be recycled through reincarnation. In some ways, I think the therapeutic cloning restarts the circle of life. So in this regard, the author is trying to talk about how the difference in perspective leads to different takes in terms of real world scenarios or real world events. And he's giving the specific example of cloning here. So the author here is trying to say that given the above discussion that we saw, the difference in interpretation when it comes to, let's say, true versus original or versus imitation kind of stuff, and in terms of artwork, the author says that this kind of notions that exist in the Western world and the Eastern world, the difference in these notions is perhaps something that is even visible in the events that unfold today. And more specifically, the author is trying to say that perhaps the kind of beliefs that is held by Easterners is why they have less hesitation when it comes to taboos such as cloning, which is a big deal in the Western world. So the author gives the example of South Korean researcher Hwang Won-suk. He says that this particular researcher, he undertook some form of research with regard to cloning, and it faced a lot of backlash from the Christian community here in the West. And the author primarily highlights that for Hwang, he's a Buddhist. So the entire process or this entire phenomenon of cloning is not something that he has a problem with, at least let's say from a religious or a philosophical perspective. So his ideology very much aligns with or resonates with this process of cloning, which is why the author is highlighting that for the Buddhist community, they are in support of cloning, while if you look at the Christians, they want this particular researcher, South Korean researcher, to be banned. So again, the author is just trying to highlight this difference in understanding. He's trying to say that it's primarily because this difference in understanding persists that there is so much conflict that exists here. And in this regard, the author is just trying to emphasize or perhaps give us an overlay of the kind of difference in notions or ideologies or beliefs that exist in the West versus in the East. This is the discussion so far. The author began this entire discussion by giving us the example of the Chinese concepts of Fujipin and Fangjipin. Now that we have understood what this discussion is about, let us move on to the questions. Question number 1. Based on the passage, which of the following copies would a Chinese museum be unlikely to consider as having less value than the original? So basically, the author is asking us to identify a choice wherein the value of that particular artwork is quite similar to the original for the Chinese museum. So let us check which of the options fits this criteria. A. Pablo Picasso's painting of Vincent van Gogh's original painting bearing Picasso's signature. Now, it's unclear as to what the Chinese museum will consider this particular artwork to be. So, for one, we know that it's a replica. It's Pablo Picasso's version of Vincent van Gogh's painting. But again, bearing Picasso's signature, is this an exact replica of what was made by Vincent van Gogh? We cannot ascertain for sure. So, we'll put option A on hold. In the absence of a better choice, we can go with A. But for now, we are not clear about this aspect of whether the painting that Picasso made is an exact duplicate, or is it an exact reproduction of what Van Gogh made? This is a question that we are not very clear about. B. Pablo Picasso's painting of Vincent van Gogh's original painting identical in every respect. Now, this is definitely something that the Chinese museum would not consider to be less in value when compared to the original. So the author is just trying to test our understanding of the concepts of Fangjipin and Fujipin. So we know that Fangjipin is any other kind of replica that is not similar to the original. So it's, let's say, smaller in size, or it has certain few modifications, or the color use is a bit different. So these are examples of Fangjipin. While Fujipin, according to the Chinese understanding, is something that is supposed to be an exact reproduction of the original, and in this regard they consider it to be of equal value to the original. So option B is one such example of Fujipin wherein the painting is exact, it's an exact reproduction, or it's identical to the original painting in every respect. So option B is something that that would be considered by the Chinese museum to have the same value as that of the original. So option B is likely to be the correct answer here. In this regard, we can eliminate option A because of the ambiguity that still exists here. C. Pablo Picasso's photograph of Vincent van Gogh's original painting. So we know photograph is definitely not an example of Fujipin, so we can reject option C. D. Pablo Picasso's miniaturized but otherwise faithful and accurate painting of Van Gogh's original painting. So again, we know that smaller in size or any other version or format is something that has to be categorized under Fangjipin. So option D is also not something that the Chinese museum will consider to be of an equal value to that of the original. So option D is also something that we can reject. We notice that only option B is fitting the bill here. It is the only option that fulfills the criteria that has been highlighted in the first part of the discussion. Hence, option B is the correct choice. Let us move on to the next question. Question number 2. Which of the following scenarios is unlikely to follow from the arguments in the passage? So we have to identify a choice that doesn't align with, or that is not consistent with the discussion in this particular passage. A. A 17th century British painter would have no problem adding personal touches when restoring ancient Roman painting. This is valid. This is consistent with one of the elements the author discussed here in the latter part of the discussion, where he says that this idea of an unassailable original did not hold water in the 17th century West. So the author is trying to say that the Western world in the 17th century was not so hell-bent on not tweaking or making any kind of changes to the original artwork. So in this regard, option A is definitely valid. It's a scenario that is likely to follow from the discussion. So option A can be eliminated. Option B. A 20th century Japanese Buddhist monk would value a reconstructed shrine as the original. This is the case that persists. We know how people consider the Ise Grand Shrine to be 1300 years old. So that's a valid point. So option B is also consistent, which is why we can eliminate it. C. A 17th century French artist who adhered to Christian worldview would need to be completely true to the original intent of a painting when restoring it. So we know that there was a lot of intervention when it came to the original artwork in the 17th century. So we cannot definitively say that option C is true or it is going to be valid. So it's something that is contradicting what is already highlighted in option A. So option C is likely to be the correct choice in this particular case, because it's a scenario that's unlikely to follow based on the information that is given to us here in this part of the discussion. D. A 21st century Christian scientist is likely to oppose cloning because of his philosophical orientation. This is true. This is again consistent with what we saw in the discussion. So we can eliminate option D. We notice that only option C here is a valid choice, primarily because it's contrary to what the author has highlighted in the passage. Question number 3. Which of the following statements does not correctly express the similarity between the Issei-Grandstein and the Cathedral of Freiburg Minster? Let us examine the choices. A. Both were built as places of worship. So this is understood. We can eliminate A. B. Both can be regarded as very old structures. Again, true. We know that these have been perceived to be very old, ancient structures. So B is also valid. C. Both are continually undergoing restoration. So this is a bit of a pickle, primarily because we know that the Freiburg Minster Cathedral is undergoing restoration continually, but the same cannot be said about the Issei-Grandstein. So we know that it's rebuilt every 20 years, but this cannot be labeled as continual restoration, because although it's rebuilt from scratch every 20 years, it's considered to be 1,300 years old. So we cannot say that this statement applies to both these ancient monuments, which is why we can put option C on hold. D. Both will one day be completely rebuilt. This is true. This is the case with Freiburg Minster. At least this particular idea is implied. We already know that the Issei-Grandstein is rebuilt every 20 years. So that cyclicity is already maintained. In the case of Cathedral of Freiburg Minster, we know that they are slowly replacing it bit by bit. So it's quite similar to the ship of Theseus thought experiment that some of you might have heard of. Altogether, option D is also a point that is implied in the discussion. Only option C is something that does not apply to both these two ancient monuments, which is why C is the correct answer here. Question number 4. The value of the modern West assigns to an unassailable original has resulted in all of the following except. So we have to find something that does not follow from this particular notion. Let us take the options. A. It discourages them from simultaneous display of multiple copies of a painting. This is true. We know for sure that the West considers the original to be superior than a Fujifilm copy that, let's say, the Chinese prioritize. So A is a valid choice. We can reject it. B. It allows regular employment for certain craftsmen. Now this might naturally follow. It is a valid option in that the value that the Western world places on the original artwork, it may lead to regular employment of craftsmen who are perhaps, let's say, responsible of preserving and restoring the original artwork. So option B is also that might, let's say, follow. It might cause this particular event to happen or this particular phenomenon to happen. So option B is also valid. We can reject it. C. It discourages them from making interventions in ancient artwork. Now, it is true that the focus on the original in the Western world, it might discourage people from trying to tweak the original work. At least that's the case today. We know that in 17th century West, there was not so much nitpicking when it came to, let's say, making changes or modifications in the original work, but that's not the case today. So option C is also valid. We can reject it. D. It discourages them from carrying out human cloning. Now, the author as such doesn't attach or correlate these two ideas of an unassailable original and this concept of cloning, which is why option D is something that we are not very sure of. Can we tie it to this particular notion? Perhaps, perhaps not. So of the given choices, option D is the correct answer, because we are not sure if this particular notion would result in option D as is asked here in the question. So option D is the correct answer here. Thank you. We at Cracku provide all the previous year CAT papers along with many other MBA examinations such as IIFT, XAT, SNAP, MAT, CMAT, TIS and PGDBA in the actual exam format. You can attempt them as a test and get a detailed analysis of your performance or download them as PDFs.
Hi friends, welcome to Cracku's video series. I'm Saili Kale. In this particular video, we'll be taking a look at a simple reading comprehension. The passage is slightly difficult to read, but the concept underlying it is super simple and the questions are also fairly simple. So let's take a look at the passage. We'll go paragraph by paragraph and then take a look at the questions. Stories concerning the undead have always been with us. From out of primal darkness of mankind's earliest years come whispers of eerie creatures, not quite alive, or alive in a way which we can understand, yet not quite dead either. These may have been ancient and primitive deities who dwelt deep in the surrounding forests and in remote places, or simply those deceased who refused to remain in their tombs and who wandered about the countryside, physically tormenting and frightening those who were still alive. Mostly they were ill-defined, strange sounds in the night beyond the comforting glow of the fire, or a shape half glimpsed in the twilight along the edge of an encampment. They were vague and indistinct, but they were always there with the power to terrify and disturb. They had the power to touch the minds of our early ancestors and to fill them with dread. Such fear formed the basis of the earliest tales, although the source and exact nature of such terror still remained very vague. So basically, a description is given of how our early ancestors were essentially terrified of the undead, an example of how they perceived them, how they felt about them, what kind of fear was generated by these tales is essentially given. Description of the tales of the undead as experienced by our ancestors. Experienced by our early ancestors. So like essentially people, earliest form of humans, earliest mankind as such. So their stories of the undead essentially are being discussed here. Now let's take a look at the next paragraph. And as mankind became more sophisticated, leaving the gloom of their caves and forming themselves into recognizable communities, towns, cities and whole cultures, so the undead traveled with them, inhabiting their folklore just as they had in former times. Now they began to take on more definite shapes. They became walking cadavers, the physical embodiment of former deities and things which had existed alongside man since the creation. Some still remain vague and ill-defined, but as mankind strove to explain the horror which it felt towards them, such creatures emerged more readily into light. So essentially, as man progressed from caves to like communities, towns, etc., the undead, essentially the concept of undead also followed them. Even as they progress, the concept of undead from like when they were cavemen to when they were city dwellers, the concept of undead continued to be there among people. And essentially, as they tried to explain it, that concept which was vague earlier became more well defined over time. Concept of undead stayed as human beings progress. Became more well defined, more well defined characteristics as such. Now let's take a look at the next paragraph. In order to confirm their abnormal status, many of the undead were often accorded attributes which defied the natural order of things: the power to transform themselves into other shapes, the ability to sustain themselves by drinking human blood, and the ability to influence human minds across a distance. Such powers, described as supernatural, only lent an added dimension to the terror that humans felt regarding them. So basically, in our belief or in our mind, we have this idea of the undead, and as because you think of them as something terrifying, your mind accords them characteristics which would be terrifying as such, which would be supernatural as such. So our conception of undead, we added supernatural, terrifying characteristics, essentially to make them even more scary. So essentially, you would think of a ghost or a supernatural being who would like drink blood, but not somebody who would like play a game or anything of that sort. You wouldn't give a characteristic which is like banal or like which is very plain or simple as such. No, in your mind it is something which is terrifying. So all the characteristics of that undead being would be terrifying. They'd like drink blood or tear open people, etc., etc. You would give characteristics only which are abnormal to something that you feel is abnormal. Now let's take a look at the next paragraph. And it was only natural too that the undead should become connected with the practice of magic. From the very early time, shamans and witch doctors had claimed at least some power and control over the spirits of the departed ancestors. And this has continued down into more civilized times. Formerly, the invisible spirits and forces that thronged around men's earliest encampments had spoken through the tribal shamans, but now, as entities in their own right, they were subject to magical control and could be physically summoned by a competent sorcerer. However, the relationship between the magician and an undead creature was often a very tenuous and uncertain one. Some sorcerers might have even become undead entities once they died, but they might also have been susceptible to the powers of other magicians when they did. So essentially, with the story of the undead rising, the stories of how these shamans and how these sorcerers can control these undead beings also started being propagated. Earlier, the story was that okay, the spirits would speak through the shamans, but the shamans now, the story became even more complicated, where the shamans could actually control those spirits and they could summon them when wanted, and it became even more complicated, where the shamans could say that okay, once they died, they would become the undead and some other magician would control them and things like that. So essentially, the stories of shamans became intertwined with the stories of the undead. Shamans and sorcerers became intertwined with the stories of the undead. From the Middle Ages and into the Age of Enlightenment, theories of the undead continued to grow and develop. Their names became more familiar: werewolf, vampire, ghoul, each one certain to strike fear in the hearts of the ordinary humans. So here the author is essentially concluding. He is basically saying from here, from the age of from cavemen to the enlightened man, we have believed in these stories of the undead and how these stories have developed over time. So tracing the evolution of stories of undead over time. So essentially, what has the author done through the passage? He has started with when we were cavemen, how we believed in these stories of the undead and how they would strike us with fear. And once we came out of the caves also, we brought these stories along with us. And the stories became more evolved, the characteristic became more, they became less vague, there were more characteristics. We added more abnormal characteristics to the undead. And the stories of the shamans became intertwined with these stories of the undead, how the shamans could summon them, how they could in themselves become undead, all of those complicated stories. So essentially the author is saying from the time of when we were Middle Ages, we were living in caves, to the now, we have always had these stories of the undead as such. So it's essentially not just ghosts, but essentially all these supernatural beings. Essentially it is tracing the belief in all of these from the Middle Ages to the Age of Enlightened Man. In order to confirm their abnormal status, many of the undead were often accorded attributes which defied the natural order of things. So this sentence is there over here. In order to confirm this, they were all often defied natural order of things, the power to transform themselves. So essentially supernatural abilities were given. And essentially, why were they given supernatural abilities? Because they were supernatural beings. So because you are trying to describe which in your mind is a supernatural, terrifying being, you are giving them supernatural abilities because you feel that, because you feel terrified by them, you feel that their qualities would be terrifying. You wouldn't give something which is you wouldn't say that okay, somebody purrs like a kitten when it is terrifying, right? It is you would give something like screech or some kind of a horrible characteristic to something which you find terrifying as such. So that is what the author is saying, that to confirm their abnormal status, abnormal characteristics were assigned to them. So basically our belief in our mind, we gave them these abnormal characteristics because we were terrified of these abnormal beings. So let's take a look at the options. Which of one of the following best expresses the claim made in the statement? Human beings conceptualize undead as possessing abnormal features. Yes, essentially when we think of them, we would always think of them as having abnormal features because we think of them as abnormal. So essentially it's the stories in the characterization of them, we have started believing that they have abnormal features because we believe that they are abnormal. So this is the only one which is actually capturing what is being said in that particular this. So let's take a look at the other options also. The undead are deified in nature's order by giving them divine attributes, not divine attributes. Divine, the author is talking about supernatural or abnormal attributes, not divine attributes at all. The natural attributes of the undead are rendered abnormal by changing their status. No, we are giving them abnormal attributes. The author is not saying that the undead are real. He's saying that this is a story that we have believed for like ages, time immemorial as such. So he's not saying that these are undead are real, or they are their natural attributes are changed or something like that. Essentially, everything is imaginary, everything is fictional, right? So in our mind, the undead exist, and in our mind, they exist with these abnormal attributes because we think of them in abnormal terms. C is like making them real, giving them natural attributes. All of that is not the case. According to the undead, and abnormal status is to reject the natural order of things. It was not given an abnormal status to reject the natural order of things. You're giving them abnormal characteristics because you believe they are abnormal. So D is missing the point. A is the right answer. Let's take a look at the second question. Which one of the following observations is a valid conclusion to draw from the statement? From out of the primal darkness of mankind's earliest years come whispers of eerie creatures not quite alive, or alive in a way which we can understand, yet not quite dead either. So essentially the author is introducing that we have been believing in these stories of the undead forever. Even when we were like cavemen, we had these beliefs, okay, there are eerie creatures just outside the glow or just outside the realm of the fire where things are visible. Just outside it, there are eerie creatures which are creeping about. So essentially he's saying that we have always believed in these creepy creatures which are neither alive nor dead, the undead as such, even when we were like cavemen as such. So let's take a look at the options. Which one of the observations is a valid conclusion? So let's take a look at the options. Mankind's early years were marked by a belief in the existence of eerie creatures that were neither quite alive nor dead, which is the correct thing. We believed in the existence of these creatures which were neither quite alive nor dead. This is exactly capturing the conclusion that is being made in the paragraph. Long ago, eerie creatures used to whisper in the primal darkness that they were not quite dead. All of these are stories. There is no such eerie creatures. There are no such actual undead. It's all about how we believed in them. B is twisting it, saying that there were actual eerie creatures. No, there were no real eerie creatures. Mankind's primal years were marked by creatures alive with eerie whispers, but seen only in the darkness. Not true, not real creatures, not really marking them, belief in these creatures, and they were not only seen in the darkness, but essentially they were believed to be in the darkness as such, just outside the view of light. So that is also incorrect. We can understand the lives of eerie creatures in mankind's early years through the whispers in the darkness. No, not about understanding, and there are no whispers in the darkness. The whispers in the darkness are your imagination. It's not understanding the eerie creatures. The eerie creatures are not real. The whispers in the darkness are not real. It is all like imagination, right? Those voices exist. So option D is also incorrect. Option A is the right answer. Let's take a look at the third question. Which one of the following statement best describes what the passage is about? Essentially, tales of the undead from the time when we were like cavemen to the age of enlightenment. He's tracing the evolution of the stories of the undead from then to now, and how that story has changed, how it has evolved, how our characteristics have changed, etc., etc. The writer discusses the transition from primitive thinking to age of enlightenment. No, not about primitive thinking, only related, his topic or focus is only related to the stories of the undead. So A misses that crucial point, or the point of focus essentially, so A is wrong. The passage discusses the evolution of theories of the undead from primitive thinking to the age of enlightenment. Yes, this is basically what the author is talking about, how we thought of the undead from the time when we were cavemen to the age of enlightenment. This is the correct topic of discussion as such. The passage describes the failure of human beings to fully comprehend their environment. No, this is only about the tales of undead, not the environment, not comprehending the environment, nothing of that sort. The writer describes the way in which the undead come to be associated with shamans and the practice of magic. This is only one paragraph. Much of the paragraphs are about how the caveman believed in the undead, how after moving to cities we still believed in the undead, how we accorded them with unnatural characteristics. A lot of this is given just about the evolution of our tales about the undead. The tales of the shaman are only a subpart or a subset of the larger tales about the undead. So D is only a part of the passage and not the main point. B is the right answer. All of the following statements, if false, could be seen as being in accordance with the passage except the undead remain. So essentially, because if false and accept is there, it's kind of confusing what the author is saying. So essentially, if this is false, then it is in accordance with the this. So whatever the option is, I'm going to falsify it, and if it is as per the passage, then it is not the right answer. If one of the options, if false, is contradicting the passage, then that is our answer. So consider the first option, the undead remain vague and ill-defined even as mankind strove to understand the horror they inspire. So if we falsify it, okay, so they didn't remain vague and ill-defined. As we tried to explain our horror, we actually gave them proper characteristics, which is true as per the passage. As mankind became more sophisticated and as we started trying to understand the world better, some still remain vague and ill-defined, but as mankind strove to explain the horror, such creatures emerge more into the daylight. So if I falsify or negate that particular option, it is in accordance with what is given in the passage. So this is not the answer. The transition from the Middle Ages to the Age of Enlightenment saw new theories of the undead. If I falsify it, that is the transition from Middle Ages to the Age of Enlightenment saw no new theories. That would be wrong, because as you see over here, that once they came into the Age of Enlightenment, you gave them like they became walking cadavers, the physical embodiment of deities, etc., etc. They essentially emerged more into the light. There were more theories, more characteristics assigned to them as you moved from Middle Ages to the Age of Enlightenment. So if you invalidate this, this is not in accordance with the passage. Essentially, if you're getting twisted with the double falsification, so essentially if you falsify, it is no longer with the passage. So if in its current form, it should be according to the passage. A is not according to the passage, so we can eliminate it. B is according to the passage, so it is the one which is correct. As we went from Middle Ages to the Age of Enlightenment, we saw new theories, new tales, or new way of looking at the undead. So B is true as per the passage. We have to basically find out which is true as per the passage. A is false as per the passage. C is growing sophistication of mankind meant that humans stopped believing in the undead. Not true. Even when you became sophisticated, even today, after Age of Enlightenment, you still have tales of the undead. So growing sophistication did not stop humans from believing. So C is also false. The relationship between shamans and the undead was believed to be a strong and stable one. No, it was believed to be a tenuous one. Tenuous and uncertain one, where one day you could become from a shaman to the undead and some other sorcerer could summon you or exercise control over you. So it was not a strong and stable one, it is a tenuous and uncertain one. So even D is false, only B is true as per the passage, so B is the right answer. In such questions, if you are not sure, I have to find the true sentence, I have to find the false sentence, find the odd one out essentially. 3 of the sentences have false value, 1 of them is true value. So basically pick the one which is not matching with the remaining 3 sentences. So the truth value of 3 are false, the truth value of option B is true. So B is the correct option to choose. So the correct answer of this particular question is option B.
Hello and welcome to another video by Cracku. A passage has been given below. Let us read it carefully and answer the questions that follow. Critical theory of technology is a political theory of modernity with a normative dimension. It belongs to a tradition extending from Marx to Foucault and Habermas, according to which advances in the formal claims of human rights take center stage, while in the background, centralization of ever more powerful public institutions and private organization imposes an authoritarian social order. So in this very first paragraph, a complicated idea is being discussed. The author highlights the critical theory of technology, and more specifically, he says that this is a political theory with a normative dimension. So what does he mean by this? By normative dimension, the author is trying to point to the value judgments or the ethical considerations that are also part of this particular political theory. So in a way, what he's trying to say is that it's not just a sort of descriptive theory, but it's also a theory that tells us about how the society should be organized or what values should be upheld. And it's not just simply describing the things or the way in which things currently operate, but it's also giving us more information about the ethical or moral considerations that are part or that are entrenched in the society. So this is what the author is trying to highlight at the very beginning here when he says that this theory has a normative dimension. So it's very much relevant to our society. Aside from that, the author also gives us a crude picture of what entails this particular theory. So he says that there was this belief which has a long tradition from Marx to Foucault to Habermas, all of these prominent figures, social theorists, they put forward this idea that there are certain situations wherein human rights, when issues associated with human rights become prominent, at the same time there is a sort of simultaneous centralization of power, or there is a concentration of power that is taking place with regard to, let's say, public institutions or private organizations. So when both of these two phenomena occur simultaneously, the author is trying to highlight that the society tends to shift to a authoritarian social order. So this is what unfolds here. And this is pretty much relevant to the critical theory of technology. Perhaps the author might discuss how this is relevant, or perhaps he might not. But nevertheless, we just need to understand that what the author is trying to highlight here is that when he talks about the critical theory of technology, he's talking about this particular system or this particular phenomena wherein there is a centralization of powerful institutions taking place, which is perhaps overshadowing certain issues or certain advances in human rights that's taking place. And via this, we can perhaps simply use the keywords marginalization of human rights and centralization of power. So these are two keywords that we can perhaps utilize or attach to the critical theory of technology. So I hope this part is understood. One important point here is about the normative dimension. Second is the way in which the author is highlighting critical theory of technology. So how technology fits into all of this is not known to us as of yet. So let us continue further. Marx attributed this trajectory to the capitalist rationalization of production. Today, it marks many institutions beside the factory and every modern political system, including so-called socialist systems. This trajectory arose from the problems of command over a disempowered and de-skilled labor force. But everywhere that masses are organized, whether it be Foucault's prisons or Habermas's public sphere, the same pattern prevails. Technological design and development is shaped by this pattern as the material base of a distinctive social order. Marcuse would later point to a project as the basis of what he called, rather confusingly, technological rationality. Releasing technology from this project is a democratic political task. So in a way, this paragraph offers more information about how technology is tied to the social situation that the author delineated earlier. So he told us about this particular social order, this possibility of two phenomena happening together. So one is the concentration of power in public institutions and private organizations, and second is how there might be a marginalization of human rights taking place, and how both of them occurring simultaneously leads to an authoritarian social order. So this is what the author points to when he talks about this trajectory here. So he's trying to talk about this particular situation that might arise out of these two phenomena. And he says that Marx, for one, attributed this to capitalist rationalization of production. So the author as such does not extend on what he means by this. We are just presented with this particular jargon. There is not much elucidation as to what this particular point or what this particular concept means. So capitalist rationalization of production is a concept that is related to capitalism, which is an economic system. I hope that's understood. And the primary objective of rationalization of production is to improve or increase efficiency and productivity through the use of technology. So this is how the idea of technology fits into this earlier concept that we were told about. And via this particular process, there are certain outcomes, there are certain implications of this capitalist rationalization of production. So although this is again not made very explicit in the passage, I'll just touch upon it. The primary goal of production is to generate profit, and what capitalists seek to do is to try to maximize this profit via introducing some kind of technological innovation in order to improve the production process and to improve the efficiency. So oftentimes what happens as a consequence of this is de-skilling and disempowerment of laborers. So why is that the case? For example, if you are introducing some kind of new technology, so let's say I imported a high-tech machine, via this I'm able to automate a set of processes that is happening at my factory. So as a consequence, what happens is that I can definitely cut down on labor costs by automating certain processes, and also I can perhaps make the tasks narrower. So I can have less skilled workers do the same job. So it won't pose a problem for me. I can pay them less wages to do simple tasks. And at the same time, even if say some of them leave, I can easily find other set of laborers. So they are pretty much replaceable. So this idea of replaceability as well as paying low wages is a part of this disempowerment that is taking place. And this is how the concept of capitalist rationalization of production is attached to this subsequent idea that the author talks about disempowerment and de-skilling of labor force. So altogether, the intention here is to just highlight that this trajectory that we observed, the stuff that the author discussed with regard to critical theory of technology is again, according to Marx, based on the concept of capitalist rationalization of production. So it's not just limited to factory, but also in socialist systems, according to him. So this is what he believes in, and we are just told about this particular concept. The author says that this problem that we come across, this trajectory, by this trajectory, he's talking about this marginalization of human rights and the centralization of power. How does this come about? This comes about because of issues in the problems of command over disempowered and de-skilled labor force. So basically, the author is just trying to give us how this particular phenomena unfolds here in the first part of the second paragraph. He's just trying to explain that this is why this particular phenomenon takes place. And why does this phenomenon takes place? It occurs primarily because of problems of command over disempowered and de-skilled labor force. So this is the reason that we are being provided here. The author also points out that such a situation that we observed in the first paragraph is something that is pervasive in nature. It's not as if it's a one-off event. It occurs anywhere where the masses are organized. So this is something that he adds to the point earlier on. So whether it be Foucault's prison or Habermas's public sphere, so again, two distinct public setups. In both of these setups, the author says that we come across a similar problem. And what is the problem? The problem that is highlighted here in the first part of the discussion. So basically what the author is trying to do is he's trying to present this context with regard to critical theory of technology. He says that this is what occurs. And here he's trying to give us reasons why this occurs and how it's a pervasive or a universal phenomenon. So I hope this discussion so far is clear. The author doesn't touch much upon capitalist rationalization of production, but his intention is made pretty clear in this part, wherein he talks about how this phenomena that he discussed in the first paragraph originates because of so and so reasons. So that is what he's trying to do here. Let us move further. Technological design and development is shaped by this pattern. So basically, the author here is giving us more information. Why is this discussion relevant to the critical theory of technology? Primarily because he's saying that such a setup, such a kind of public order or social order is influencing technological design and development. So the way in which we are creating our machines, the way in which we are creating our instruments, or any kind of utility that originates due to technology is influenced by the social space. This is what the author is trying to convey here. And in this manner, he says that it uses such a social setup as its substrate. So any kind of technological development that takes place in such a social setup is influenced by all the external factors. So in a way, these social elements, they impinge upon the technology that we observe at any given point in time. So this is the idea that the author is trying to convey here. So far we have come across three prominent ideas. One, the author is trying to talk about the normative dimension of critical theory of technology. Two, he talks about this particular theory or at least the context in which this theory is relevant. He presents us with a justification of it as to why this particular social phenomena occurs. And now we came across another point, important point in which the author is trying to highlight how technological design and development is influenced by social factors. This last part about Marcuse is a bit odd, primarily because again there is no context whatsoever. Who is Marcuse? What is this project that is being referred to? So there is certain set of complicated ideas here as well about technological rationality and this idea about, let's say, how democratic political task, how this entire affair of perhaps releasing technology from this project, whatever it's being mentioned here, is a democratic political task. But again, this is basically a reference to a social theorist who was associated with the Frankfurt School. So Marcuse, he was a person, a social theorist, and in his work, he argued that technology in itself was not neutral of any kind, but it was not neutral, but it was rather shaped by, and it reflected the values and the interest of those who developed it. So in a way, again, he's trying to iterate this point that the society in which any kind of technology emerged it was sort of responsible for impinging or sort of imprinting certain values that are present in that society on that technology. So this is what he meant, what Marcuse meant. So he referred to this affair of shaping of technology by, let's say, particular social values and interests as projects. So this is what he meant here. And this term, technological rationality, is something that is used to describe the way in which technology is often used to, let's say, rationalize or justify certain political or social arrangements. So this is what he meant by technological rationality. And what is being described here is how technology and social elements are intertwined, or they are mixed at some point in time. And this entire affair of removing technology from such a social affair is, according to Marcuse, a democratic political task. So what he wants here is for us to utilize technology in a more humane way, in a more equitable way, rather than, let's say, using technology to justify certain existing vices in a way. So technological rationality, the idea of technological rationality here is that we are using technology to justify certain existing social and political norms, which according to him might not exactly be correct. What we need to do is to sort of divorce technology from such a from using technology from such justifications, and instead we have to use technology for benefits rather than to, let's say, justify vices in a way. So this is what the author is trying to convey here. But again, we don't have much information about this. The author is as such not giving us much to go forward with here. Altogether, the two primary points that we need to focus on is how the author is trying to say that the earlier phenomena that we discussed about this particular trajectory wherein there is a marginalization of human rights and centralization of power, how it originates. So that's one of the primary ideas here in the second paragraph. And two, how technological design and development is influenced by social factors. These are two key points that we need to remember here from the second paragraph. Let us move further. In accordance with this general line of thought, critical theory of technology regards technologies as an environment rather than as a collection of tools. So here we gain more idea, more clarity as to what critical theory of technology is trying to tell us. So we understand that here, as part of this particular theory, we are considering technology as an environment rather than as a collection of tools. So I hope this is pretty self-explanatory. We live today with and even within technologies that determine our way of life. Along with the constant pressures to build centers of power, many other social values and meanings are inscribed in technological design. A hermeneutics of technology might make explicit the meanings implicit in devices we use and the rituals they script. Social histories of technologies such as bicycle, artificial lighting, or firearms have made important contributions to this type of analysis. Critical theory of technology attempts to build a methodological approach on the lessons of these histories. So there are three set of points that we need to remember here. One is what this theory itself means, what critical theory of technology means, or how it perceives technology. It perceives technology as an environment rather than as a collection of tools. Second is the implication of this. What is the purpose here? Why do we view technology as an environment? Primarily because we identify that social values are at large influenced by technology. So there are certain meanings that are associated with the technology that we design or develop. So that's the agenda here, that we intend to understand the meaning that is hidden behind these technological design. Why or what purpose does this technology serve? What element of human nature or what element of the society is it reflecting or symbolizing? This is something that we aim to do here. And three, how social histories play an important role in this particular process. So the author is trying to say that we are trying to analyze technological design and development in the context, in the social context. We are viewing technology as an environment. And in this regard, we also want information about the history of certain technologies. So he gives the example of bicycle, artificial lighting, and firearms. He says that studying the social history of these elements will be more insightful for us. It will be more helpful for our analysis or the approach that we are planning to undertake as a part of critical theory of technology. So this is what he's trying to convey here. So these are three key points that are three ways in which we can break down this particular paragraph. One, the role of technology, or the way in which this particular theory views technology as environment and not as collection of tools. Two, the way in which we are trying to analyze or break down technology in a way to understand the hidden meaning behind it. What is the reason this particular technology is created, or let's say how is this reflecting a particular social interest or particular social value in a way. And three, how social histories play an integral role in this particular analysis. So these are three elements that we need to be careful of here in this particular paragraph. Let us move forward. As an environment, technologies shape their inhabitants. In this respect, they are comparable to laws and customs. Each of these institutions can be said to represent those who live under their sway through privileging certain dimensions of their human nature. Laws of property represent the interest in ownership and control. Customs such as parental authority represent the interest of childhood in safety and growth. Similarly, the automobile represents its users insofar as they are interested in mobility. Interests such as these constitute the version of human nature sanctioned by society. So here what the author is trying to say is that technology is pretty similar to other social institutions such as laws and customs. He presents his claim and then he's justifying it in a way. So for one, the author says that technology shapes the way in which the inhabitants behave, or the values of its inhabitants. So that's one point the author wants to emphasize here, and this is pretty similar to what takes place with laws and customs as well. The author gives us example for each of these. So he says that let's take the example of property laws, for example. It represents the human interest in ownership and control. So that's one example. Example number two is customs such as parental authority. So you want your child to have a safe environment, and this is reflecting in fact a belief in childhood and safety and growth. So this is another belief that basically a particular custom is reflecting. So again, what the author is trying to do is that he's trying to showcase that each of these elements have a purpose. Each of these social institutions, in this case laws and custom, has a purpose, and so is the case with technology. This is the point he's trying to present here. He gives the example of automobiles. He says that people are interested in automobiles primarily because it reflects their own innate interest in mobility. So that's a way that we can look at technology as an environment rather than as a collection of tools. And in a way, the author is trying to say that technology is very much tied to human nature. It's not as if it's disjoint. In a way, the author is trying to say that technology grants power to certain aspects of human nature. This is what he's trying to convey here. So he says that this entire phenomena is quite similar to what happens when it comes to, let's say, other institutions such as laws and customs as well, and he's giving us this example. So he's making this broad claim here in showcasing how technology is in fact associated with human nature, or at least it empowers certain elements of human nature, and this is how technology functions as an environment according to him. So I hope this segment is clear. Compared to the earlier paragraphs, this is much more straightforward and clearer. Let us move on to the next part of the discussion. This notion of representation does not imply an eternal human nature. The concept of nature as non-identity in the Frankfurt School suggests an alternative. On these terms, nature is what lies at the limit of history, at the point at which society loses the capacity to imprint its meaning on things and control them effectively. The reference here is, of course, not to the nature of natural sciences, but to the lived nature in which we find ourselves and in which we are. This nature reveals itself as that which cannot totally be encompassed by the machinery of society. For the Frankfurt School, human nature is in all its transcending force, emerges out of a historical context, as that context is depicted in illicit joys, struggles, and pathologies. We can perhaps admit a less romantic conception in which those dimensions of human nature recognized by society are also granted theoretical legitimacy. So again, it's a bit disjoint from what has been discussed earlier on, but altogether the primary idea here is with regard to the author's description of human nature. He says that it's not something that is fixed or eternal. So in a way, the author is trying to highlight how human nature is malleable or it changes with time. So this is what he's trying to emphasize first. So this notion of representation, what does it refer to? It refers to the earlier description that the author undertook about how the laws and customs and technology, how all of these institutions are definitely reflective of certain human interests. And this is exactly what the author is trying to do here. So in a way, he's trying to showcase that the interest in itself is not something that is fixed. It's not as if humans have, let's say, for since time immemorial, they have been interested in mobility, which is why they first developed automobile in the Stone Age. That's not the claim he's trying to make here. What he's simply trying to showcase is that that human nature is definitely changeable. It's not something that is fixed or eternal. If anything, according to him, it's shaped by the historical context in which it emerges. So this is what he discusses or emphasizes in the latter part of the discussion. He's trying to give the example of this concept of nature as non-identity. So this is something that the Frankfurt School, so it's one of the schools that is associated with, let's say, social theory. And he's trying to say that this is one of the ideas that the Frankfurt School had first put forward, which is the concept of nature as non-identity, which suggests that nature is not fixed or stable, but rather it's something that is constantly changing and evolving. So it's again reiterating this earlier point that the author had mentioned here. What else is discussed here in this part? So the reference, of course, is not to natural science. So basically, the author is just trying to talk about this concept of lived nature. So by lived nature, he might be referring to the way in which human nature is experienced and understood, rather than, let's say, how it is analyzed or studied as part of natural science. So that's one way to break down or interpret this sentence. Aside from that, the author says that, okay, nature reveals itself, which cannot be totally encompassed by machinery of society. Again, in a way, what the author is trying to convey here is that it's important for us to study nature in its historical context, human nature in its historical context, rather than, let's say, at any point, any given point in time, or let's say saying that it's fixed in any manner. What the author is trying to say is that oftentimes we have to analyze it in a specific manner, and according to him, the best way to do this is to do so with the consideration that human nature is not fixed. So that's the only claim that he's trying to present here. The rest of this discussion is just trying to give us, a supplementary information about this point. For the Frankfurt School, human nature, again, so it's giving us the idea of Frankfurt School's belief about human nature, that it has to be studied in a historical context. So that's what is being emphasized time and time again here in this latter part. We can perhaps admit a less romantic conception, so in which these dimensions of human nature recognized by society. Okay, basically what is being said here is that in this part is that this particular claim by Frankfurt School might sound quite idealistic or quite romantic. So maybe that might be a more realistic version of this, but that realistic version might also hold true. So in a way, the author is just trying to showcase this point, that this idea of technology representing certain human interest or certain human nature is valid enough. Only that we have to consider the idea that it has to be studied in a historical context, and that human nature is ever evolving, ever changing. So these are elements or constraints that we need to be careful about. That's the point being made here in the latter part of the discussion. So again, a lot of complicated elements, but again, they are a bit disjoint from the discussion at times. The core here is perhaps the third and fourth paragraph, according to me. The first and the second paragraph set context, but again, they go on a tangent wherein they talk about certain additional elements. But nevertheless, again, the purpose is to showcase that there is a specific social situation, and it is within this situation that we have to understand the role of technology as an environment. This is the idea that the author is putting forward via this discussion. Now that we've understood what this passage is about, let us move on to the questions and try answering them. Question number 1. Which one of the following statements best reflects the main argument of the fourth paragraph of the passage? So 1, 2, 3, 4. So fourth paragraph, here the author talks about technology as an environment rather than a collection of tools, and he talks also about how technology plays a similar role to that of laws and customs as an institution, which reflects the the human interest in certain elements or certain concepts. So that is the idea he is conveying here in the fourth paragraph. Let us check which of the option aptly captures this. A. Technology, laws and customs are comparable but dissimilar phenomena. In a way, this is true. The author does say that they are comparable. Claiming that they are dissimilar phenomena is also perhaps justified. But again, this is pretty vague. The author is quite specific when he discusses technologies, laws and customs. So he says that technology is in fact comparable to laws and customs because of so and so reason. So he says that they are comparable because laws and customs reflect certain human interest. So is the case with technology. That's the argument he's presenting here. He's not, playing around the bush. So option A is quite vague, primarily because it doesn't hit the nail on its head. So we'll put option A on hold. In the absence of a better choice, we'll go with it. B. Technological environments privilege certain dimensions of human nature as effectively as laws and customs. So for one, the author does say that technology, laws and customs, all three of these, they do grant some power to certain aspects of human nature. But again, does he compare them in terms of effectiveness? No. So option B is a distortion, which is why we can eliminate it. C. Automobiles represent the interest in mobility present in human nature. Again, true, this is what the author discusses, but he cites this as an example. So can we say that this is the main argument of this particular paragraph? No. This is something that the author utilizes as, let's say, a jumping point. He uses this as his groundwork, and then he builds on this and is just trying to give this or put forward this idea that technology, laws and customs are comparable in that they lend power or they lend legitimacy to certain interests that we have. So option C is also a bit off topic, or rather it is talking about the example, which is not capturing the main argument here. We can reject it. D, technology, laws and customs are not unlike each other if considered as institutions. This is true. The author is trying to talk about the power of these three, in that if they function as institutions, they are reflecting certain human interests. So option D is perhaps much better than option A, in that it is trying to talk about the similarity in terms of how we can consider each of these three as institutions. So that would in a way implicitly emphasize that as institutions, they do reflect human interest. So option D is a better choice than option A, which is why it is the correct answer here. Question number 2. Which one of the following statements could be inferred as supporting the arguments of the passage? Let us examine them. A, it is not human nature but human culture that is represented by institutions such as laws and customs. So it's unclear how this is supporting the argument in the passage. If anything, if this is true, it might be contrary to what the author has discussed. So we can reject option A. B, technologies form the environmental context and shape the contours of human society. Now, if true, this is definitely going to support the claims that the author has made because it aligns with it. The author has already highlighted technology as an environment, and then he talks about how this is in fact technology should be assessed in the context of human history and human society. So shaping the contours of human society is again valid point, because now we are viewing technology as an environment. So if true, this will definitely support what is being discussed in the passage. We'll put option B on hold. C, nature decides the point at which society loses its capacity to control history. Now it's unclear how this is supporting the discussion. Nature is making a decision. So again, I personally feel that this is totally off topic, which is why we can reject it. D, the romantic conception of nature referred to by the passage is one that requires theoretical legitimacy. Again, this is just the exam setter playing with words, because for one, the romantic conception is not clarified. We are just told that perhaps a realistic version of this can also be granted theoretical legitimacy, but again, requires theoretical legitimacy is not something that is clear enough. So option D is also something that we can easily reject, because it is just jumbled up words. Altogether, we notice that only option A and B are somewhat relevant to the discussion, and only option B is the one that is supporting the argument presented in the passage. So option B is the correct choice here. Question number 3. Which one of the following statements contradicts the arguments in the passage? A, the problems of command over disempowered and de-skilled labor force gave rise to similar patterns of the capitalist rationalization of production wherever masses were organized. This is in line with what the author has discussed in the second paragraph. For one, he does talk about how the entire problem arises because of capitalist rationalization of production, and how there are certain problems with regard to the command of disempowered and de-skilled labor force. And he says that this problem is pretty much common, it's pervasive, it's universal, in that anywhere that masses are organized, you might come across such a setup. So option A is in fact reiterating this point that we came across in the second paragraph, so we can reject it. It's not contradicting the arguments of the passage. B, Marx's understanding of capitalist rationalization of production and Marx's understanding of a project of technological rationality share theoretical inclinations. They do share theoretical inclinations primarily because they can be used to understand the critical theory of technology. So that's one common point that we can perhaps draw between these two elements. But aside from that, both of these again talk about how technology fits into this entire picture, this entire social phenomena. So in a way, option B is also somewhat correct in that they do share theoretical inclinations. So we can reject option B. C, masses are organized in patterns set by Foucault's prisons and Habermas's public sphere. The author doesn't make such a claim in the passage. We are not told, or we are not presented with such a idea where it's stated that Foucault's prisons and Habermas's public sphere is something that is used as a mold to observe how masses are organized. That's not the case in the passage. So option C is something that cannot be inferred from the information that is provided to us. So if anything, the author or the passage is stating that the pattern of this capitalist rationalization of production, which is marked by the centralization of power in institutions and the marginalization of human rights. The author says that this arrives in different set of contexts, including factories, prisons, and public spheres. He's not as such stating that these different contexts are like, he's not claiming that the patterns in these different scenarios are set by Foucault's prisons or Habermas's public sphere. So option C is again not something that we can understand from the discussion, which is why it's likely to be the correct choice. D. Paradoxically, the capitalist rationalization of production is a mark of so-called socialist system as well. This is true. This is something that the author has clarified. He says that this idea of capitalist rationalization of production is part of many modern political systems, including socialist systems. So option D is valid. The use of term paradoxically is perhaps because of how we often consider socialism and capitalism as two ends of a pole. So option D is also true. We notice that only option C is something that is not discussed in the passage, which is why it is the correct choice here. Question number 4. All of the following claims can be inferred from the passage except, so we have to find something that cannot be understood from the discussion. Let us evaluate the choices. A. The significance of parental authority to children's safety does not therefore imply that parental authority is a permanent aspect of human nature. The author outright states that anything that you consider as part of human nature should be viewed as something mercurial or something that is ever changing, ever evolving, not something that is fixed. So option A naturally follows from this idea, which is why we can reject it. It's something that is valid based on the discussion. B. The critical theory of technology argues that as issues of human rights became more prominent, we lose sight of the ways in which social order becomes more authoritarian. This is valid in the sense what has been discussed in the first paragraph, wherein we are told that when these issues come to the forefront, at the same time in the background there is more centralization of power leading to an authoritarian social order. So option B is also a valid idea, which is why we can reject it. C. Analysis of technologies must engage with their social histories to be able to reveal their implicit and explicit meaning for us. This is true. This has been emphasized in the third paragraph, I believe, where we came across social histories of different technology being an important or an integral aspect of this entire analysis that is part of the critical theory of technology. So option C is also something that we can reject. D. Technologies seek to privilege certain dimensions of human nature at a high cost to lived nature. So this part is something that I can agree with, that technologies do seek to privilege certain dimensions of human nature. It grants power or grants legitimacy to certain elements. But aside from that, the author doesn't present such a clause. He doesn't say that this occurs at a high cost to lived nature. So there is no discussion whatsoever presenting or backing this particular claim. So option D can be rejected, or sorry, rather it is the correct answer here, because it's a claim that cannot be inferred from the passage. So option D here is the correct answer. Thank you.
Google search Cracku CAT formulas PDF. Click on the first link. You will get a list of topics for CAT. Click on one of the topics. Download the PDF to get a list of formulas for the topic.
Hi friends, welcome to Cracku's video series. In this particular video, we'll be discussing a para completion question. These were the new types of questions that came in CAT 2022. So in this video, you have to basically find the right place for putting the sentence. The sentence is given, the paragraph is given, and you have to say which of the blanks 1, 2, 3, 4, in which of the blanks should the sentence be inserted to form a coherent paragraph as such. So let's take a look at the sentence is, having made citizens more and less knowledgeable than their predecessors, the internet has proved to be both a blessing and a curse. So basically the author is saying that the citizens are both more and less knowledgeable at the same time. So essentially that's a kind of a irony as such. You can't be both more and less knowledgeable at the same time. So let us try to see the paragraph and then we can understand what the author is trying to say through it. Never before has a population, nearly all of whom has enjoyed at least a secondary school education, been exposed to so much information, whether in newspapers and magazines or through YouTube, Google and Facebook. Yet it is not clear that people today are more knowledgeable than their barely literate predecessors. Contemporary advances in technology offered more serious and inquisitive students access to realms of knowledge previously unimaginable and unavailable. But such readily available knowledge leads many more students away from serious study, the reading of actual text, and towards an inability to write effectively and grammatically. It has led people choose sources that reinforce their opinions rather than encouraging them to question inherited beliefs. So essentially, a very puzzling statement is given in the sentence. The paragraph kind of explains that puzzling sentence. That is that people are both more as well as less knowledgeable. Why are they more knowledgeable? They are more knowledgeable because they have access to a lot of knowledge that was previously unavailable. They are less knowledgeable because having so much access has basically moved them away from serious study, actually reading things across the board, across the spectrum. Now they only read things that actually reinforce their own belief system. So that is why it has made them less knowledgeable as such. So if you can see, this particular statement is explained by the paragraph. The statement is a conclusion that is drawn from the arguments that are given in the paragraph. Since it is a conclusion, it is better suited at number 4. If you put it in the middle of the paragraph, it doesn't make sense, because the author, the person who is reading it would be like, why would you say more and less knowledgeable? The author is explaining exactly why more and less knowledgeable, essentially through the entire paragraph. This part is over here is explaining together why they are less knowledgeable, and this part over here, he is explaining why they are more knowledgeable. So essentially, and the topic is introduced over here. So introduces the topic that you are not clear whether they know more or they are more knowledgeable or not. The positives are given, the negatives are given, and the author then concludes by saying that okay, they are both more and less knowledgeable than the predecessors. So this statement is explained by these arguments and should definitely come after them, otherwise it would make no sense as such. So the right place for putting the given sentence is option 4. Hi friends, welcome to Cracku's video series. I'm Saili Kale. In this particular video, we will be taking a look at a para-summary question. So first, let's take a look at the paragraph. Let's identify the main aspects of the paragraph and then take a look at the options. Petitioning is an expeditious democratic tradition used frequently in prior centuries by which citizens can bring the issues directly to governments. As expressions of collective voice, they support procedural democracy by shaping agendas. They can also recruit citizens to causes, give voices to the voteless, and apply the discipline of rhetorical argument that clarifies a point of view. By contrast, elections are limited in several respects. They involve only a few candidates and thus fall far short of a representative democracy. Further, voters' choices are not specific to particular policies or laws, and elections are episodic, whereas the voice of the people needs to be heard and integrated constantly in democratic government. So essentially, petitioning has been an age-old tradition, petitioning is an old tradition, and the advantages of petitioning are given. Secondly, the author discusses some shortcomings of elections, which essentially can be overcome through petitioning as such. Shortcomings of elections, that is, they are episodic, only a few people are on the vote, like there are only a few candidates, etc., etc. So petitioning's positives are given, elections shortfalls are given. The author is saying that petitioning has an age-old tradition, essentially in bringing governments directly to bringing issues directly to the government, and essentially it supports procedural democracy, and it tells you what the positives of petitioning are and what the shortfalls of elections are. Those are the 2 points being majorly covered by this particular paragraph. Now let us take a look at the options, and we will also take a look at options to remove any kind of distortions or bringing in points that are not actually part of the passage. By giving citizens greater control over shaping political and democratic agendas, political petitions are invaluable as they represent an ideal form of representative democracy. Ideal form of representative democracy has not been given at all in the passage or paragraph as such. It tells you that elections fall short of representative democracy, but that petitioning is an ideal form of representative democracy is not given. So this is extraneous to the passage, and because it's a distortion, we can eliminate it. Citizens become less inclined to petitioning as it enables vocal citizens to shape political agendas, but this needs to change to strengthen democracies today. That citizens are less inclined to petitioning is not at all mentioned in the passage. This is a clear one which we can eliminate. Petitioning has been important to democratic functioning as it supplements the electoral process by enabling ongoing engagement with the government. Essentially, it is supplementing the deficiencies with the electoral process. That petition is an old tradition. What it does, it helps in overcoming the issues that are there with election process as such. So this is capturing both the points as such. What are its advantages? And its advantages essentially overcome the shortfalls of the election process. So C is actually capturing the main point of the paragraph as such. Let's take a look at option D as well. Petitioning is definitely more representative of the collective voice, and the functioning of the democratic government could improve if we relied more on petitioning rather than holding periodic elections. This particular recommendations, don't hold periodic elections, instead hold more petitioning. Is this a recommendation that the author has said? No. In fact, the author says that periodic elections, because they are episodic, are not capturing the full voice of the people. But he doesn't say that don't hold periodic elections. He's saying that petitioning supplements or supports representative democracy. Petitioning is not a replacement for elections, not suggested in the paragraph at all. So D is a distortion of what is given, so it can be eliminated. C is the right answer. Hi friends, welcome to Cracku's video series. I'm Saili Kale. Here we have a paras completion question. These are the new type of questions that were introduced in CAT 2022. We are given a paragraph and we are given a sentence, and we have to find out the right place of placing that particular sentence in the paragraph such that we have a coherent paragraph at the end of it. So let's take a look at the sentence. Easing the anxiety and pressure of having a big day is part of the appeal for many couples who marry in secret. So a reason is given why people choose to marry in secret. Let's take a look at the paragraph. Wedding season is upon us, and after 2 years of COVID chaos that saw a nuptial scale back, you might think that the temptation would be to go all out. But instead of expanding the guest list, many couples are opting to have entirely secret ceremonies. With COVID cases numbers remaining high and the cost of living crisis meaning that many couples are feeling the pinch, it's no wonder that some are less than eager to send out invites. Plus, it can't hurt that in celebrity circles, getting married in secret is all the rage. I would definitely say that secret weddings are becoming more common, says Landis Bejar, the founder of a therapy practice which specializes in helping brides and grooms manage wedding stress. People are looking for ways to get out of the spotlight and avoid the pomp and circumstance of weddings. They just want to get to the part where they are married. So essentially, a paragraph is given and the author is trying to explain why people want to have secret weddings, where they don't want all the pomp and circumstance around having a public wedding and inviting everybody as such. So firstly, before we this is a reason why people would want to marry in secret. A reason is given, but before we give a reason why they want to do something, we have to explain what is actually happening. And essentially at the start of the paragraph, the author says that, okay, you would expect people would want to have these lavish wedding celebrations, but that is not what is happening. In fact, many people are choosing to have secret ceremonies. So this is the context, and after that you would give all the reasons why they are having marriage secret ceremonies as such, or why they are choosing to marry in the secret. So one is definitely not the blank, because this part, the first two sentences, give you the context about what is actually occurring. That you would expect that they would be like going all out, but instead they are not actually going all out, they are actually having secret ceremonies. So one is definitely not the right answer. Now if you look at the remaining sentences, with the COVID cases remaining high, so one reason is given why people are having smaller ceremonies. Cost of living crisis, meaning that they're feeling a pinch. Another reason why you are having a small ceremony or a secret ceremony. Less than eager to send invites. Plus, it can't hurt that it's a celebrity circles. It is getting married in secret is all the rage. So this is like the last reason why it is considered that it is a this good thing as such. So basically, this is one of the reasons why you would get married in secret. So you'd give two reasons, and finally you would say plus it is all the rage among celebrity circles. So two would be a good fit, essentially giving three reasons total why people are choosing to marry in secret as such. So two would be a good fit for the given sentence. But also let's look at 3 and 4. 3 is basically after the plus one. So basically when you say plus, it's kind of the last reason that you are giving. You won't say, okay, reason A plus reason B and reason C. That is not a flowing paragraph. You'd say reason A, reason B plus reason C. That is essentially kind of concluding with the list of reasons as such. And the third reason is the most flimsiest, that okay, celebrities are doing as such. So 2 would be a better fit than 3. 3 doesn't make sense as such. Then we have the quote of somebody who is a therapist who specializes in helping brides. And essentially, she is giving one quote which is saying that people are looking to go out of the spotlight and avoid the pomp and circumstance of weddings. So they don't want to do all that stuff. What they want to do is just get to the point where they are married. So if you see, there is no point of putting the easing the anxiety and this of having the big day. It won't make sense over here, because the author is like this, the person who is quoting Landis Bejar is basically saying people don't want to do this, people just want to do this. So both of these sentences are related into each other. So 4 is also not a good blank. The only good blank for it is option 2. So the correct option to choose is option 2. Hi friends, welcome to Cracku's video series. I am Saili Kale. In this particular video, we are going to take a look at a para summary question based on the view or narrative pushed about Ethiopia. So let us take a look at the paragraph. It's not that modern historians of medieval Africa have been ignorant about the contacts between Ethiopia and Europe. They just had the power dynamic reversed. The traditional narrative stressed Ethiopia as weak and in trouble in the face of aggression from external forces. So Ethiopia sought military assistance from their fellow Christians to the north. But the real story, buried in plain sight in medieval diplomatic texts, simply had not been put together by modern scholars. Recent research pushes scholars of medieval Europe to imagine a much more richly connected medieval world. At the beginning of the so-called age of exploration, there is evidence that the kings of Ethiopia were sponsoring their own missions of diplomacy, faith and commerce. So basically what is being mentioned is that there was a narrative that was pushed earlier. Though there was clearly there was evidence that always there was evidence to support a more nuanced view. A narrative was pushed that the Ethiopia is weak and it was reliant on its Christian countries in the Europe, and it was dependent on them as such. But the truth is actually not that. The truth is that they were actually Ethiopia itself was capable of sponsoring its own commerce and diplomacy and faith missions as such. It was a power in its own and not dependent or reliant, looking for being saved by its Christian countries in Europe as such. So that narrative that was pushed has recently been debunked by recent studies as such. So let's take a look at the options. Medieval texts have documented how strong connections between Christian communities of Ethiopia and Europe were invaluable in establishing military and trade links between the two civilizations. This is talking about actually debunking a widely held earlier narrative, which was essentially where they assumed a certain power dynamic, which was just not true. And this option completely misses the fact that a earlier held view has to be debunked. So A is clearly not the right option. Historians were under the illusion that Ethiopia needed military protection from their neighbors, but in fact the country had close commercial and religious connections with them. They didn't have close commercial and religious connections with their neighbors. They had close commercial and religious connections with Europe. They were able to sponsor their own connections with Europe. It is not about their relations with the neighbors, but the connections between Ethiopia and Europe as such. So B is a distortion. Medieval texts have been cherry-picked to promote a view of Ethiopia as weak and in need of Europe's military help with aggressive neighbors, but recent studies reveal it was a well-connected and outward-looking culture, completely showing that, okay, this was the earlier held narrative was false. The new studies are showing the true picture as such. So this is correct. I would say this is the right summary. Medieval historical sources selectively promoted the narrative that powerful European forces were called on to protect weak African civilizations such as Ethiopia, but this is far from reality. It's not such as Ethiopia. It is talking only about Ethiopia and Europe. So it's not that, okay, there were other weak African civilizations like Ethiopia that the European forces came to protect. This is a gross distortion of what is actually given in the paragraph, which speaks only about Ethiopia and Europe as such. So D is also incorrect. C is the right answer. Hi friends, welcome to Cracku's video series. In this particular video, we are taking a look at a para jumble, which is based on how shorter commutes are the right way to go about having people come back to office as such, how longer commutes kind of kill productivity, and work from home is also not good for productivity. So let's take a look at the sentences. Some company leaders are basing their decisions on locating offices to foster innovation and growth, as the best performing inventors suffered the greatest productivity losses when their commutes grew longer. Shorter commutes support innovation by giving employees more time in the office and great opportunities for in-person collaboration while removing the physical strain of a long commute. This is not always the case. Remote work does not automatically lead to greater creativity and productivity, as office water cooler conversations are also very important for innovation. Some see the link between long commutes and productivity as support for work from home scenarios, as many workers have grown accustomed to their commute free arrangements during the pandemic. So basically, you see a link between 4 and 3. 4 says that many people are seeing that because of the long commutes and the drop in productivity, you know what works best? The work from home works best. And during the pandemic, they saw that they had a commute free time. So that basically they feel that instead of having all those long commutes, what would be better for productivity is us working from home. But 3 says, but this is not always the case, because for innovation and for productivity, you also need people to come in the office and for there to be in-person collaboration, for there to be office cooler conversation, etc. Remote work does not automatically lead to greater creativity. So 3 essentially is a rebuttal to 4. So 4 and 3 should be together as such. But 4 essentially comes this some see the link between, basically this link is established in 1. We see that there's a link between productivity losses and longer commute. So essentially this link is given in 1 and that link is expanded in 4. So 1 should precede 4 and 3. The conversation about how shorter commutes are the right way to go essentially introduce this topic of how shorter commutes are good for collaboration, for removing the physical strain, and the overall objective is basically innovation and productivity as such. So 2 introduces the topic, 1 gives you what was observed, 4 says that this essentially says that maybe we should go for work from home, but 3 says that is not the right way, shorter commutes would be the better idea. So the order of the sentences should be 2, 1, 4, 3. Hi friends, welcome to Cracku's video series. I'm Saili Kale. In this particular video, we are taking a look at a para-jumble which tells you about the importance of creative element in product design and how this is like this industry is widely expanding, its importance is increasing as such. So let us take a look at the sentences. The creative element in product design has become of paramount importance as it is one of the few ways a firm or industry can sustain a competitive advantage over its rivals. In fact, the creative element in the value of world industry would be larger still if we added the contribution of the creative element in other industries such as the design of tech accessories. The creative industry is receiving a lot of attention as its growth rate is faster than that of the world economy as a whole. It is for this reason that today's trade issues are increasingly involving intellectual property, as Western countries have an interest in protecting their revenues along with freeing trade in non-tangibles. So if you see, there's a link between 1 and 4. 1 says that this is product design, the creative element in product design is of paramount importance because the IP of your product is there in the product design as such, and basically like the Western countries want to protect their IP by essentially copywriting the product design that they have, and essentially then they can protect their IP. So 4 is a consequence of the fact mentioned in 1, that creative element gives them a way in which it can sustain its competitive advantage because there's intellectual property in it, and that is why they are so interested in it as such. So we see a link between 1 and 4. We also see a link between the creative industry is receiving a lot of attention today and it is growing at a fast scale. And if you consider the fact that it is also involved in like design of tech accessories, its value in the world would be even more as such. So 2 essentially adds detail to what is mentioned in 3 as such. So 3, 2 are also paired. They together describe the growing importance of the creative industry in the world's economy, and it would in fact be even greater if you consider the design of tech accessories and other parts of the world's economy. And 1, 4 basically say why is it important, because basically the IP is there. So 3, 2 introduces the topic of the importance of the creative industry. 1, 4 says that why it is more important is because all the IP about like having a product or developing a product comes from its design, and that is the creative element of it. So 1, 4 gives you further explanation. So 3, 2, 1, 4 forms a coherent paragraph. Hi friends, welcome to Cracku's video series. I'm Saili Kale. In this particular video, we'll be discussing a para summary question. So let us take a look at the question. All that we think we know about how life hangs together is really some kind of illusion that we have perpetrated on ourselves because of our limited vision. What appears to be an inanimate object such as stones turn out not only to be alive in the same way that we are, but also in many infinitesimal ways to be affected by stimuli just as humans are. The distinction between animate and inanimate simply cannot be made when you enter the world of quantum mechanics and try to determine how those apparent subatomic particles, of which you and everything else in our universe is composed, are all tied together. The point is that physics and metaphysics show there is a pattern to the universe that goes beyond our capacity to grasp it with our brains. So the author is saying that this distinction that we have made between inanimate and animate is simply not true, and it is especially more evident once you enter the realm of quantum mechanics. When you try to understand from the perspective of quantum mechanics what is inanimate and what is animate, that veil between the two completely falls away. There is no distinction of between inanimate and animate as such, and basically we are not able to grasp of essentially there is a pattern to the universe that we are not able to grasp as such. So the author is saying that our distinction between inanimate and animate completely falls away when we start to think of it from the perspective of quantum mechanics and trying to understand things from the quantum mechanics. It is difficult to make any distinction of that sort, and essentially like the patterns we see in the universe they are essentially not something that we are able to grasp at the moment. So let's take a look at the options. My objective would be to remove or eliminate erroneous options as such. The effect of stimuli is similar in inanimate objects when compared to animate objects or living beings. The author is basically saying that they can be affected by stimuli. The author does not say that the effect of stimuli in inanimate object and animate object is same. Firstly, it's a distortion. Secondly, this is not the main point at all. The main point is that there is no such distinction if you take a look at it from the quantum mechanics perspective. So missing the main point and the distortion, it's easy to eliminate option A. Quantum physics indicates that an astigmatic view of reality results in erroneous assumptions about the universe. Nothing is given about erroneous assumption. It's basically saying that we are not able to grasp the universe as such, not able to understand the universe. It's not about erroneous assumptions. Secondly, it's not an astigmatic view. It is basically a incorrect view as such. The use of the word astigmatic view would be incorrect. But mostly what the author is saying is that a distinction between animate and inanimate, it does not really exist, and that is missing in option B. So crucial information is missing, so option B can be eliminated. The inanimate world is both sentient and cognizant like its animate counterpart. Sentient is a big jump. Nowhere is sentience mentioned. Sentience basically means your ability to think and know. A rock can think is like completely beyond the scope of what is mentioned in the paragraph. So C is definitely easy to eliminate as such. Arbitrary distinctions between inanimate and animate objects disappear at the scale at which quantum mechanics works. Exactly. That the difference between animate and inanimate, you can't make the distinction anymore once you start to think from a quantum mechanics perspective. So only D actually captures the point, and D is the right answer. Hi friends, welcome to Cracku's video series. I'm Saili Kale. In this particular jumble question, we have the idea of using fish collagen for bandages, etc. So let us take a look at the sentences and let's try to see how to order the sentences. Fish skin collagen has excellent thermostability and tensile strength, making it ideal for use as bandage that adheres to the skin and adjusts to body movements. Collagen, one of the main structural proteins is in connective tissue in the human body, is well known for promoting skin regeneration. Fish skin swims in here as diseases and bacteria that can affect fish are different from most human pathogens. The risk of introducing disease agents into other species through the use of pig and cow collagen proteins for wound healing has inhibited its broader application in the medical field. So you see that, okay, 3 says that, okay, this is why fish skin comes in. Why does it come in? Because you can't use cow and pig collagen because you will be introducing diseases from pig and cow into human skin. But we can use fish skin because the pathogens that attack fish are different from human pathogens. So the limitations of pig and cow collagen, that you would get diseases from pigs and cows into the human body, that is overcome by using fish collagen. So 4 introduces a problem with using collagen as a bandage in the medical field, and 3 tells you a way to overcome that shortcoming. But the first introduction should be about how collagen is of value as such. So collagen basically is of value because it promotes skin regeneration. So that is why it has value in the medical field as such, because it can be used for band-aids as such. So 2 introduces the topic of using collagen. 4 tells you a potential shortcoming that we can't use pig or cow collagen, but fish collagen can be used. And then the properties of fish collagen have to be given. So why would it make a very good bandage? Because it would allow for movement, it is thermostable, it has tensile strength, etc, etc. So 2 tells you, okay, the value of collagen. 4 tells you can't take just any collagen. 3 tells you that fish collagen would make sense, and then 1 tells you the advantages of fish collagen. So together this tells you about why fish collagen is a good idea. So the order of the sentences should be 2, 4, 3, 1.